Ukrainian tank crews on Leopardy 2A4 destroyed convoy of 5 armored vehicles. Let's talk about Roman Svitan. Roman, glad to see you. Glory to Ukraine. I wish you all good health. Roman, nice to see you. We're having a busy day. Before you start, give us a like and write a comment where you can watch us from. Your city, your country, we know there are many of you. Write and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. With your support, this video will be seen by more people, which is important during the war with Russia. Roman, we start with news from Kursk region, which is temporarily occupied by Russia. There is unrevised information that the Ukrainian armed forces have taken control of the village of Kurylivka in Kherson. No info from the General Staff. Roman, what is happening in Kherson, specifically about this operation? What is the dynamics on the part of the enemy and the AFU? And about the Kursk nuclear power plant. How unlikely is it that the Ukrainian armed forces will try to reach it? When tasks are set, forces and means are allocated for their fulfillment. By allocated means and forces, the radius of tasks can be determined. The number of troops in the Kursk direction does not indicate the task of reaching the Kursk nuclear power plant. 50 kilometers is an operational breakthrough, but the current number of troops is not enough for that. The Russians have about 50,000 troops there. For an operational breakthrough, we need 100,000 on our side. This is not realistic now, but it is possible to fulfill the tasks along the Sumy River. The configuration of the control of Russian territory and the location of Ukrainian troops allow us to predict the exit to the left bank of the Sumy. The opportunity is there. Events are held in the area of Tyatkino and other settlements on the left bank. The Russians know this. Bloggers complain about Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups performing tasks in this direction. We do not confirm or pass on tactical information. In 3 to 4 days, it will be clear where the exploration is taking place. This is still a battlefield reconnaissance. The configuration of the front shows that the left bank of the Sumy is a priority if it is decided to develop the operation in the Kursk direction. Possible actions of our troops in the Belgorod and Bryansk directions of the Northern Front, which we have already broken and can expand. Depending on the task, it will be clear in 3 to 4 days, when by the end of the week we will be discussing this direction on a daily basis. I think we'll get to the truth, but for now it's best not to post tactical information as it's not accurate yet. Based on the possibilities, we should expect an expansion of our control on the Northern Front in the near future. Roman, I agree. We propose to proceed to the official applications. Paris plans to supply Kyiv with Vinnyshuvachii Mirage 2005 by the end of the first quarter of 2025.
Пан Барон, ми про міражі з вами неодноразово говорили, обговорювали. І що сказав саме Барон, цитую, французький міраж, будучи найближчим часом в українському небі.
We are looking forward to seeing what functions these aircraft can perform at the initial stage. We will see if we see an increase in Air Force, but it is important to understand what tasks the aircraft will perform. At present, F-16s are used to protect the sky and destroy Russian targets. An airplane is a launcher, and whatever you hang on it, that's what it will be. Hang an airplane bomber, hang an air-to-ground missile, attack aircraft. With an air-to-air missile, it becomes a fighter interceptor, like the Mirage, depending on the mission. The Mirage totally lives up to expectations. The French don't usually let you down. Mirages will be delivered in the first quarter as promised. It will be one squadron, about 15 to 18 airplanes. The first batch, 3 or 4 aircraft, is probably already in Ukraine, agencies confirm. Macron has probably fulfilled his promise to deliver the first batch. Three or 4 airplanes, most likely for training tasks. That is, it is used like an ampoule. It can perform combat missions, including dropping missiles and launching Storm Shadow Scalp. HIMARS are basic aerial bombs that are already in use by some of our aircraft. The MiG-10 missile is the primary missile for this airplane, air-to-air, for destroying air targets. There will be a set of missiles and bombs to destroy enemy ground targets and ships. Also to be used as naval aviation. It is a multi-role fighter in this configuration for ground and electronic warfare operations. One squadron is enough to support the offensive. Now, Roman, let us move on to the next news item, which definitely deserves a liking. A video was shown at the beginning of the broadcast. A Ukrainian Leopard at the Pokrovsk district has destroyed an armored group of Russians. A Leopard has destroyed a Russian column of armored vehicles on the Pokrovsk Strait. Officially announced in the Khortytsia OTU. Let's watch the video before the discussion. Roman, how do you assess the work of the AFU in this operation and the situation at the Pokrovsk line? What are the enemy's dynamics and what are the prospects for an attack in the coming weeks and months? The crew of the Virtuza, well done, as in a shooting gallery they shot the Russian column. Epic footage, as I've said before. Thank you to the press centers that provide such footage to the information stream. It is important that Ukrainians and the army see the use of the equipment transferred by partners. The Leopard 2 tank, even the A4, on the level of the Challenger, K2, and Murkov, perform well. It depends on the skill of the crew. The crew demonstrated virtuoso use of the tank. We have quite a few well-trained tank crews. Tanks are not always in short supply, but the crews are there and training is underway for new positions. Tanks need to be maintained, and the problem with their repair has not yet been fully solved, which affects the preparation of tanks for combat missions. If a tank gets into position and accomplishes a task, especially with a great crew, its performance is impressive. The Pokrovsk direction is one of the most difficult. There are several locations on the front where the Russians are trying to advance. The main thing is the operational breakthrough of Russian troops to the third line of defense. This is not a breakthrough of the front, but an exit to the third line, where they were stopped in the area of Pokrovskoye, Udashny, and Kotlin. The Krasnoarmeyskaya Zapadnaya mine, if used as a fortification, will prevent the Russians from moving westward and encircling Pokrovsk, reaching the Pavlograd highway. Our troops are coping with the task in the direction of Udashny and Kotlin, near Krasnoarmeyskaya West. The Russians will attempt to extend their incursion in the Udashnoye area, moving south of Shevchenko. Russians use the settlements of Yuzhny and Pokrovsk. The Russians use Shevchenko as a point to build up their strength. Russian reserves are being accumulated to break through and push through the front in this direction. Equipment has appeared, but the main tasks are performed by Russian infantry units. The attempt to bypass Pokrovsk from the south ran into the railroad, which became a stumbling block. That's right. That's where our defense is lined up. It can hold the enemy when reinforced with personnel and equipment. The Russians realize the futility of attempts to move towards Dnipropetrovsk region and have begun operations to cover the Pokrovsk-Mironovgrad agglomeration from the north, trying to reach the Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka highway. The attempts were unsuccessful. Russian equipment was destroyed. Maybe the video was from that direction. The Russians are trying to break through our troops in the northeast in groups of 10 in order to encircle Pokrovsk without entering from the north. Surrounding it will not work because there is a road that connects Pokrovsk with Dobropilya from the north. The Russians will try to encircle it from the south and north. This is the main threat to Pokrovsk in the near future. There is an opportunity to stop the Russians in the Pokrovsk area, as we have been saying for months. They've been stopped. Now, we need to build on the success and squeeze the Russians with flank kicks. Everything depends on the availability of resources to prevent the enemy's flanks from unfolding. If the Russians manage to reach Dobropilya from the north and level the front along the line of Velikaya Novoselka-Pokrovsk, this will lead to the unfolding of the front along the border. This will create prerequisites for further advancement of the Russians, for example, to the southwest towards Zaporizhzhia region. They are unlikely to go to the Dnieper because there is no strategic objective. May affect only the eastern edge of Dnipropetrovsk region, no more. This task requires a lot of effort and money, and the efficiency from it will be low. I think they will deploy along the border of Donetsk region, trying to move north to Dobropilya, as the northwest of Donetsk region is difficult to control. They have no operational reserves, all forces are already in battle, and the Russians cannot expand the front by 50 kilometers. At least for the moment. That is why Putin set the task of mobilizing reservists in January. It's a covert forced mobilization. Chasing reservists, trying to wean them or hold events. They could be operational by March-April. That is by mid to late spring, possibly May, depending on preparations. Without these additional reservists, who were called partisans in the USSR. Without these partisans, the Russians will not be able to make much headway from a strategic standpoint. It is impossible to deploy on the western part of the Eastern Front. They will try to operate in other directions, closer to Russia. In the Kupiansk direction, Dvoreshnoye, Kupinsk, Alamanskoye, Torskoye, they will try to squeeze our troops from Belogorovka, reinforced from Seversk. Two sites near Konstantinovka will be worked out to the maximum. Toretsk, Chasov Yar to reach Konstantinovka and pressure on the agglomeration of Slavyansk-Kramatorsk, Drushkivka. The Russians can accomplish these tasks in the next few months, based on the availability of current forces and means, as well as possible reserves. Roman, you brought up two rivers. We turn to the audience. Support the defense forces of Ukraine. Your support is important. Every hryvnia counts. We repeat these words every day, and they are important. Channel 24 is holding a collection on Nissan Navara for Sumy Prigorodnoy Choral. We are collecting money to help the boys who are carrying out combat missions in Sumshchina and Kursk region. 97% of 100. On the 28th of June, Russian media reported about the occupation of Dvoreshnoye, citing the Russian Defense Ministry. Oleg Singubov said that the village is an active combat zone, but it is not occupied. We have mentioned Kharkiv region, so please tell us what is happening there now. If Dvoreshnoye is occupied, what will be the next target for the Russians, and what could happen in the worst-case scenario? It is possible to predict the enemy's operational objectives based on his tactical operations. Strategically clear, an attempt to reach the left bank of the Seversky Donets across the Kharkiv region. From Volchansk to Kupiansk, along the railroad through Veliki Burluk. The strategic task in this direction is now impossible because of the Russians' forces and means, which are tied up in Volchansk. In the Kupiansk area, they are trying to fulfill the operational task of controlling Kupiansk-Uzlovaya in order to ensure railroad communication and supply of troops. This is the left bank of the Oskol. The Russians have been trying to put pressure on Kupiansk along the left bank for a year and a half. The Russians achieved nothing except a few exits to Kupiansk on the left bank. They entered Kupiansk, but were destroyed and pushed back to their starting lines, controlling neither Kupiansk nor Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. The tactically correct but dangerous decision is to move to the right bank of the Oskol and try to move from under Dvorekhnaya to Kupiansk, squeezing the garrison from both banks. For this purpose, it was necessary to cross to the right bank, create a bridgehead, and expand it. The expansion of the bridgehead rested on Dvorekhnoy, which the Russians were trying to capture. They established a bridgehead to the north, but were thrown off by our forces and pushed beyond the Oskol. Finding the Russians on the right bank of the Oskol is dangerous. The Oskol is a small river, but still a water obstacle through which it is difficult to move forces and maintain a bridgehead. Russia's northern bridgehead in the area of Dvorekhnoy was destroyed. Russians had moved to southern beachhead. Now they're trying to expand it northward, including Dvorekhnoy. The fighting has been going on for a long time, especially in the southeastern part of Dvorekhnoy. The decision to evacuate the citizens of Dvorekhnoy was made weeks ago, predicting the movement of the Russians. A dangerous situation for Russians. With the arrival of at least one heavy mech brigade, the Russians will be mopped up and dumped in the river. This beachhead, if not expanded, could become a trap. We'll see how things develop. Perhaps this trap is already being set. The danger for us is that if the Russians hold the right bank of the Oskol and start pressing on Kupiansk from both sides. This will create a serious danger, up to the withdrawal from the left bank of the Oskol and the loss of Kupiansk-Uzlovaya, with its railroad interchanges on the eastern bank. It is important to hold Kupiansk to prevent the Russians from creating a military hub there, as in the Valyek area. The task is to move it south to put pressure on our troops closer to Liman. Roman, there have been reports in the media and among the military and MPs that the war will continue until the end of 2025. Ukrainians should count on it, said Sakhanov, a serviceman. The MP said there would be no end to the war in the coming months. I have information from closed sources. Roman, why has the rhetoric in the media changed if just a few weeks ago they were talking about a possible end to the war and now other narratives dominate? Why did they start talking about it synchronously? Will the war really last until the end of 2025? Politicians in 2023 have created a dangerous message of peace summits. He is dangerous in trying to take over the processes, especially in matters of peace, because the people are tired. Playing on the feelings of the people, the politicians overreached. What do you mean? They have toyed with the idea of peace summits and negotiations with Russia to the point where the Ukrainian armed forces almost believe it. That is, Ukrainian servicemen thought that peace and cessation of hostilities were ahead. Then why fight and die? Naturally, bayonet into the ground and into the AWOL. That is, politicians have set in motion a negative trend from 2023 onward. This should be the level of Russian propaganda, to impose on the people defending their land the idea of cessation of hostilities, in fact, of surrender. It was not imposed by the Russians, but by our politicians. In recent months, everyone has obsessed over the idea of a freeze, which has caused the number of abandoned positions and AWOL to rise. Bent, recycled to Russia. This is state treason, which should be dealt with by counterintelligence and the SBU. The idea was thrown in, and the talking heads picked up on it. The talking heads are bloggers and media who regularly spread insights about the imminent cessation of hostilities, tying them to different dates. Too much. Now, some politicians have realized that no one wants to go to war anymore. Why go to war if there's peace tomorrow? Now the tide is turning. Thinking people realized that it was a mistake or a deliberate provocation, perhaps even a sabotage against Ukraine. War is math. Everything can be calculated. In 2022, with enough weapons, the war would have ended with the liberation of Crimea and Donbass, reaching the borders of 1991. The Russian army would not have been able to withstand resistance and retreat. This was evident in the escape of the Russians from the Izium cauldron and from the right bank of Kherson. We were stopped funding, stopped aid, stopped intelligence transfer, and turned the wrong way. In 2022, it could be finished. If in 2023 we had everything we were promised, planes, missiles, and weapons, the war could be over by the end of 2024, at least a phase of it. At the current stage, we have another 3 to 4 years to fight. Believe me, 3 to 4 years we still have to fight, and we need to immediately take into account these terms to fulfill combat tasks. Guys are tired on the front line. We need to take action based on these calculations. It's math. We need to plan for 3 to 4 years of war, including rest for the guys for a year on the home front to rebuild, manning up, and deciding on further combat participation. To do this, you need to provide other options. We need to build a line of law enforcers. There are no other options at this point. Based on this vision, the minimum time frame is 3 to 4 years. The task can be accomplished no sooner than 2027 to 2028 by vacating the site. The first year and a half, work with Crimea. We will start with aviation, maybe Mirages and Gripens, work on Crimea. Then another 2 to 2.5 years to liberate Donbass, totaling 3 to 4 years. Now it's finally dawning on the politicians what they've done. Naturally, they switched in the opposite direction. This is what it looks like right now. Roman, while we're talking to you, there are new absurd statements from Russian dictator Putin, not the president of Russia. He said it would all be over in 1.5 to 2 months if Ukraine runs out of sponsorship money and ammunition. Roman, what is the purpose of these statements? It's not just about Putin's statement here. It's about what happens if aid from our partners, especially the US and Europe, is reduced or stopped. Can we count on ourselves in the future, and to what extent? The worst-case scenario. If all our helpers disappear. Now, we receive 2/3 of our funds, equipment and ammunition from our partners, and 1/3 is ours. It all depends on the intensity of the fighting and the location of the front. Here's the worst-case scenario, all gone at once. We'll have to move to the right bank of the Dnieper. There are no other options. We will not be able to hold some directions, but on the Dnieper line we will hold it 100% thanks to our efforts and resources. Russians won't cross it. Even from the north, from Belarus, there are serious fortifications. We could lose the left bank of Ukraine if our partners abandon us. Perhaps we will create a corridor for Russians south of Odessa, through the backwater, so that they can pass to Moldova, to Transnistria. One option is to divert Russian troops by sending them along Romania into Moldova, Transnistria, where they will be met by Orban and Fico, and then into the Balkans. They can't solve this issue. This will unload our direction, but will create a problem in Europe. I think the development of the situation prevents the Europeans from considering other options to help us. With Europe's help and our participation, we can hold the front. That's 2/3 of our total forces and means. The front line is as it is now, with no plans for offensive operations. We'll be able to defend, but we won't be able to attack. 1/3 of U.S. aid is used to develop and execute offensive operations, such as Kursk or air mechanisms. Nothing catastrophic is going to happen. Putin is telling fairy tales. He is as far removed from military planning and math as our politicians. They are as distant as Putin is. Without military education, he cannot calculate the development of the situation or predict actions. And his advisors have already advised him on everything. They've been pushing to face Ukraine. The same kind of advisors are around. I think it's rather directed mostly at Trump. With prompting mechanisms to stop the fighting in 100 days. He's telling Trump how to stop aid to Ukraine. And then they say, the war will be over in 1 to 2 months, but it won't be over. I repeat, align the front along the lines of the natural barriers. Putin doesn't know what physics is. All the banks of the west of our rivers are higher than the east. Physics allows us to hold redoubts with these laws. Putin doesn't know that. Any river, especially one flowing from north to south, becomes an insurmountable obstacle for Russian troops. If it's prepared properly, that's one way to go. From across the Dnieper, we can reach the Urals. We already have drones, and the war will not end. It will be convenient for us to align along the Dnieper and continue to attack Moscow. Putin has ghostly, fantastical messages for Trump. Trump, I think, is not reacting. We see economic pressure on China, India, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. There will be serious economic pressure, not military pressure. The optimal option is to save money first, crush the Russian Hydra, and then grind the military one. We'll see how things develop from here on out. Putin overplayed his hand and burned himself with a complete lack of understanding of the military. Friends, what do you think of the applications we talked about? Write in the comments. Roman, these are not the only tales the dictator told his Kremlin journalist. He also said that Ukraine should have left Donetsk and Luhansk regions after February 24th. Roman, how does this relate to the purpose of the SBO? How is this absurdity to be perceived? It's aimed at a Western audience. Do you think this is not directed at Russians? This started right after the start of the SWO. We told the Ukrainian leadership that people in the LNR and DNR did not want to be part of Ukraine. Get out of there, and it's over. Negotiations were immediately agreed to. At the end of February, 95% of the Russian leadership's statements were aimed at a domestic audience. I mean, it's all for them. Two-thirds of Russians support Putin's gibberish, including Ukraine's withdrawal from Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Why should I leave Donetsk? My ancestors have been lying in cemeteries for 200 years. They are Cossacks that hundreds of years ago from Zaporizhzhia and Sich went to Kuban and left their stanitsa. All my relatives are from there. I am Ukrainian, from Donetsk, and there are millions of people like me. Why? Because Putin wanted it? That's his personal problem. It will not happen. Ukraine will not leave Donbass. It is much easier to get Crimea back than Donbass. After the return of Crimea and the destruction of Russian military facilities by long-range weapons of mass destruction. It's going to happen this year, and then no one will talk to Putin. Then we will plan to liberate the rest of the territory seized by the Russians. The Ukrainian people have never given up what is theirs. We are not Russians, we are Ukrainians. We were taught not to take other people's things, and Russians were taught to seize and steal. Ukrainians are not like that. We'll get ours back, and then we'll come after those who killed our brothers and citizens. The liquidation operation has already begun, and those who participated in terrorism and genocide against Ukraine will be eliminated because they cannot be left alive. They are a very prolific people. Thank you for an informative conversation, your analysis, and position. Roman Svitan, Colonel, Instructor Leochik, ZSU. Vladyslav Solovyov and Olga Bilan were with you. Put a like,